What are we talking about tonight are display typefaces. So those typefaces that are usually considered loud, too decorative, not serious enough, not as serious, and not really real typefaces like book typefaces. So how did I change my mind on book typefaces? Well, my story starts from Milan, where I'm originally from. I now live in Seattle. And in Milan, we have a very nice subway system. The subway system was originally designed by Bob Norda and Massimo Vignelli, that you probably know about. So meaning, being a graphic design student in Milan means that those are the kind of projects that you study. These are the references. So you can see that kind of typefaces that are used here. Another example, again, from Vignelli when I was still in Milan. Max Huber, another great designer that worked in Milan for a long time. Albe and Lika Steiner, probably those two are less known to the American audience, but very important in Italy, and again, great designers, both of them. The beautiful illustration by Laura Lamb. She worked in Milan for La Rinascente, that was the big department store in the city center. Other projects. Franco Grignani, that you probably know for the poor wool mark, he designed that and had this very dynamic and optical kind of style, but look at the typefaces that you see there. Again, A.G. Fronzoni, another great designer, very minimal, using typography, black and white, using white space a lot. So growing up in Milan, being a student there, meant for me that I was a modernist. Those are the typefaces where it was Helvetica and not much else. Those were the real typefaces. But then I met an English professor and type historian at the university that suggested that I start researching 19th century type in Italy. Who were the foundries? What kind of typefaces were there available? So I embarked in this quest together with Emanuela Conidi, that is also a fellow type designer now working in London. And we started working on typefaces like the one you've seen. So the era that we investigated, and that's still investigated right now, many years after my graduation, is what happened after Battista Bodoni, that you may know together with Dido for designing these very modern typefaces. Modern, when we talk about in typography, is not the same as modern in design. Modern are those typefaces, very vertical, with very thin details. And what happened in the century till the beginning of the 20th century, when something similar to what happened here in the US, when all the small foundries were gathered together with the American type founders, something similar happened in Italy with the Nebbiolo type foundry. So I had to research these typefaces that were completely different from the typefaces that I studied at university and that I considered good typefaces. Or to say that in the word of Stanley Morrison, the worst typefaces that have ever been designed. And of course, I don't think that's true, but my point is that I'll try to convince you to today. So the research was based on specimen. And if you go to the archive and you ask, and you should, for the people that work there, if you want to see some type specimen, they will explain to you that type specimen are quite rare and precious because they were working tools. And people, when the type specimen was substituted by the more updated one, they would throw it away. So it's very difficult to find original type specimen from the different type foundries or from the printers that would print all the typefaces available in their print shop so that their customer could choose which typefaces to be used for their job. I usually show this slide at the end, but because I'm extremely thrilled of being talking to you in a library, I want to stress the importance of public libraries in my research. If it wasn't for them, almost none of what you would see had been preserved. So thanks to public libraries and to archives like the Letterform archives or Typoteca in Italy, it was possible to try to see what were the type foundries active in that period of time. So this is just an idea of the places where I've been in my research, that it's still going on. As you can see, I'm planning to be back at the Letterform archive because there's so much collection, so much beautiful type there that I need to be back. And some other places where I would like to go also back in Italy. So let's start our journey. What happened during the 19th century? Why type specimen before that time, they looked like that? This is a very famous specimen from William Caslon. We are in the UK. This is from 1734. And if you look, there's only one design of typeface that is just scaled in sizes. And there's the matching italic and other scripts beside Latin. But then, with the 19th century, this happened. A boom in different letter shapes, different decoration, outline, inline, shading, all of the above, plus flowers, pearls, logs, whatever. What happened? The Industrial Revolution. That is the key that changed the history of typography and printing types. You have to think that from Gutenberg till the beginning of the 19th century, the technique for printing types, they evolved, but they didn't radically change. They were still manual. To create a typeface, the punch cutters had to cut the single punches. It was a long process. What happened during the Industrial Revolution was that every aspect of the production and of type and the printing, the making of paper, started to be mechanized. So everything changed on that side. On the other side, the Industrial Revolution, people coming to the cities to work, the availability of goods, theater, cruises, there were goods to be advertised. And for the first time, there was the necessity of typefaces that would advertise things. So something beyond book typefaces. And that is where everything started. So we are on the top, the beginning of the 19th century. You see that is a modern typeface. Very elegant, high contrast, so the thick strokes are very thick and the thin strokes are very thin. What can you do if you want to make that more interesting? The third thing that was done was to make it fatter. So make the thick strokes thicker. And yeah, great. I don't know if you can see it, but then here you see that what is changing from here to here is that the shapes are the same, it's just that the thick strokes are getting thicker. Then those typefaces were not book typefaces. They were meant to be used at a large size. So what can you do? You can make them bigger, but you can also show in the design that they are fat and chubby. And so you can see those figures are, look at that 7 there. So all those details. So these were the first typefaces that were designed to attract attention and to be interesting, to have a lot of details. This is another example. This is from one specimen at the archive. So look at the leg of the R here. It's really showing there's a lot of weight there. So in Italy, what happened? We have Battista Bodoni that was considered an extremely skilled punch cutter, very good typographer. If you look at the proportions here, you can see that he was printing for the royals throughout Europe. There's this very generous margins. Sorry, too fast. The inking is perfect. The typefaces were perfect. But he was so out of time. What was happening around him was the Industrial Revolution. Other printers were printing books in small format, more affordable, so that more people could buy them. So what we see in the first type specimen, those two are from the Amaretti Brothers. There were some punch cutters that worked for him in Parma, near Milan. But they had a fight because Bodoni they were very good. Bodoni wanted them to work for him and for him only. They didn't want. So they opened their own type foundry. And their own type foundry lasted till the beginning of the 20th century, when at the end entered into the Nebbiolo. So what you see here are exactly modern typefaces, as the one that we've seen before. Of course, this is less rich than the book that we've seen from Bodoni, but still we have generous margins and the framing. This is a little later. Still, the style is very similar. This is Comoretti type foundry from Milan. We are around the 1940. You see that we can see the first decorations there. So we have some, well, outline typefaces with shading, extremely condensed with some little details to make them more interesting when they used big. But still, the general layout is still pretty sober. Here, this is a specimen from printer and lithographer. And you can see that he was having a lot of fun drawing this opening page. And the layout is very, again, typical from the early 19th century. But then the last two pages printed in this super black ink. And from that, you could tell that he was really proud of these typefaces. He wanted them to be printed perfectly. And one fat face, one modern, very large typeface, one with shading, and one that was really something with like very many layers of shading, a very intricate decoration, very black. And if you notice, this is a slab serif. It's different from the other typefaces that are there. And that is because during the 19th century, not only black typefaces started to be designed, but also slab serif. You have to think, you are a punch cutter in the early 19th century. You have your model that is the modern face like Bodoni or Didot. What can you do to make those letters more interesting? You make them fatter. OK, done. What can you do? You make all the thin details thicker. Well, that's how the slab serif is born. And that was quite popular, because it's very black. Also, it's less delicate than the modern face that we've seen before, so it resists printing very well. Another big invention of the 19th century, it's something that we take for granted, that is the concept of bold. We know whether we use Microsoft Word or whatever software, we know that many typefaces, we can change them into italic or we can change them into bold. Well, the concept of bold didn't exist before the 19th century. That was because it was not necessary to have a hierarchy on the page. The bold was born out of not book typography, but printing railway timetables, manuals, books that needed a hierarchy so that were not read from the beginning to end. And what you see here, this is the English Clarendon. Again, we are in London, 1848. And that was patented to be the first bold. So the first bold at a more or less book size for books. So what else can you do if you have the letters? We made them thicker. We made them bolder. What about if we cut out the serifs? And you can see here, this is a sans serif, 1834. From the design, it's not, I mean, we have seen better typefaces so far. It's a bit chunky. The leg on the R is a bit weird. The S is way too light. Probably what happened there was literally to take a slab serif and chop out the serif. But if we look on top, and here we are again in London, 1816, around 1816, that sans serif there is way more elegant. It's very proportionate. It has a very nice spacing in between the letters. they don't belong to the same model. So the idea is that this one, that is the first example of a sans serif that we have on print, was inspired by inscriptions on buildings and sign paintings. Sans serifs existed outside typography before they were integrated into typography. Well, but they were not popular yet. So 1816, that was too soon. 1834, this is the first that start to appear. But then better typefaces, sans serif, were created, and then they became very popular. If we move slowly towards the mid of the century, what is happening is that this model is not there anymore. So typography and the layout is loud, decorative, very visual, mixing different typefaces. And it's so rejected that this typeface that is called Italian, and it was very popular in many different versions. If you look at it, it's the exact opposite of the Didot and Bodoni model that we've seen. So again, what can I do? I invert the thin and the thicks. Where it's thin, it's thick. Where it's thick, it's thin. So if you look at the B, the serifs are very light, and here the serifs are super big and slab. The stem on the I is thick, then it's thin. And then you have this, it's pretty crazy. But it's very consistent with the idea of making the inversion of the model there. So they were extremely experimental. As I mentioned before, sign paintings were popular, and they influenced a lot 19th century typefaces, trying to mimic this 3D effects, this decoration. This is one of the fantastic examples that is at the archive. This is another example, again, from the archive. This is, before we were in England, here we are in France. And this is not printed, well, it's not letterpress, this is lithography. So it allows to have many more details to be printed. And this is a fantastic example of capital letters with extremely fine details that were not possible to obtain in wood or in metal. So just to keep in mind that that was the trend. What happened with movable type? Well, they tried to mimic and to go on with the trend of decoration. So what you see here, these are not large sizes, but you see, again, an example, a smaller example of like what we've seen before with a lot of decoration. This was extremely popular, made of pearls with double shading, other crazy decoration, 2 layers of shading, super compact, not to mention the borders. So other example, this is a type Foundry from Milan that was probably influenced by French typefaces. And you can see again that some decorations were very minimal in a way compared to the others that really any kind of decoration was invented. But if you look at the letter shapes themselves, they're not very inventive, apart from, well, the slab serif was something new. The fat face, so with very high contrast, was something new. But they were not distorting the typefaces yet. They were just adding a lot of layers of decorations. Like, why not trying the different perspective point of view? Let's rotate the letters. Or let's create crazy composition. Try to do that with movable type that everything is squared. That's not easy. Or combine this intricate layout with different, this is 1843. A lot of, here you can have more an idea of the sizes of the different typefaces. This is a specimen from the extreme east of Italy. That's now Italy, back then was Austria. But we have some very beautiful examples. This is one of my favorite because it's starting to see, oh, but I can have different serifs then. What happens if I cut them? What happens if I add little details? and then printing in 2 colors. We see again the typeface, the same typeface that we've seen before. This is because being inspired by other people's work was extremely common. Most of the typefaces that you see in Italian specimen were copied or imported from France, Germany, mainly, and later in the century also from the US. Again, what is interesting to me, and I hope to you too, if you look at this typeface here, it doesn't show its age. In a way, it could be something from the 90s. Maybe the shading gives it away a little bit, but the design itself could be pretty contemporary. Of course, something like this, it's showing its age a little bit more. But something like this, very, well, it's not as extreme in the contrast as the one that we've seen before, but very tall serifs. This is another example from the archive. This one, we're talking 1844, that is pretty contemporary. But of course, that also had this decorated version, because why not? Towards the end of the century, the experimentation moves from, so to recap, beginning of the century, new letter shapes. Then mid of the century, crazy decoration. The same letter space with any kind of decoration, shading, everything. End of the century, let's try to experiment on letter shapes. And here where things get interesting and crazy. So again, these are some examples from the archive. Those were samples from sign painters that made this sample sign so that he could acquire clients and tell them, this is what I can do. And this can tell us how Paris looked like at the end of the 19th century, because this is French. So you see we have this letter shape here is pretty mid-19th century, but then something Art Nouveau start to appear. You see this, soft curves and decorations. Something more even, this is typically Art Nouveau. This is fantastic. Shading effect. So the experimentation, of course, borders of any kind. This is one of my favorite spreads from, this is from Nebbiolo Company in Turin, in Italy. It was probably not original, but it's fantastic. And also Art Deco, but here we are at the end of the 19th century, so pretty innovative. That was what was, please admire the opposite of minimalism. And these were single borders. And of course, this was advertising material from the Type Foundry. So it was impeccably printed in many different colors. And if you look at it live, and this is, I'm not stressing it enough, use the libraries, use the archives that you have, and go see the live printed elements. Because especially with movable type, it's a completely different experience. It's a physical way of printing. And you can see it, you can perceive how thin and perfect the details are. So very Victorian, very, I don't know, again, the opposite of minimalism, you can see there are vases and any kind of leaves and then different colors. But this is great. This is, of course, has nothing, this was what the avant-gardes and Futura and geometric typefaces reacted to. They had enough of this, too much. I want something that is different from everything else that happens in the past. And in a way, you can tell that probably after many years of these, people wanted something else, something different, something geometric and white and black and maybe a little red, no many colors, no decoration. But that was the spirit of the time. That was it. And that's what I think makes it interesting. So what you see here, some type specimen start to become mixed. So you have typefaces from beginning of the century, mid-century, but then you see these having this shading here, this intricate patterns on the background, these details, they start to be very typically end of the century. Or these one here. Also this is 18 points, so it's not, 18 point is the big letter, so it's actually pretty small, but still extremely decorated. And you see some examples of different letter shapes, more intricate serifs and decoration, some beautiful typefaces designed to be printed in 2 colors. So it was actually 2 that could be printed one next to the other. And again, this is a beautiful specimen of a type foundry from Genova. There's only one example known in the world, and it is in a tiny library up in the hills in the middle of nowhere, and they have this amazing specimen. And I'm so happy that they kept it, because otherwise there would be no trace of this type foundry. And it's printed in 1, 2, 3 colors. One is gold, so it's pretty expensive, and extremely well printed. Again, this is slightly inverted contrast. You see that the center is more light than the top and the bottom. But I love this very much because it's completely crazy. Look at the serif here and the C or the S. Yeah. I started to, after looking at these typefaces for a long time, I started to appreciate them, not for their look, but for the fact that they were extremely experimental. They were catching the spirit of the time. So of course, if we look at them now with our eyes, our taste is different. So that is not interesting from that point of view. But from the point of view of a type designer, of someone that creates letter, it's extremely interesting the process that led to those typefaces. Some other crazy here. This is a favorite of mine on top. It's very elegant with this broken connection. And there's some crazy, if you look at it very close, there are some crazy solution like on the E here. This is also, I don't know how they ended up doing something like that, but it's pretty crazy too. Then, turn of the century, Art Nouveau. Art Nouveau means a different kind of decoration. It's very decorative, but it's a different kind of decoration. So it's the soft lines, typefaces start to be a little more geometric in a way. And here we see some examples. Something like this was very typical of the time, where the center of the typeface is moved up. Something like this, having these swirls and swashes inside and around, letter shapes. Here, other examples. This is the other rival of the Nebbiolo that ended up being part of it. So we're at the last stage before the Nebbiolo became what was later known. So mix, this is quite beginning, mid of the 19th century. These are more contemporary. Then this is another of favorite pages of mine. Because if I just showed you these two, you probably would have said, that's something very 90s. And it's extremely, again, we cannot use that. It's not our contemporary taste. But again, it's extremely interesting. And that was done in the beginning of the 20th century. It has more than 100 years. And to me, that is pretty crazy. I also find quite cute that the son or daughter of the printer here wrote inside the letters, like it was a little exercise. And also here, but you don't see that, but having fun. So what about today? Why I would like to change your point of view on display typefaces. It's because display typefaces are the ones that are not designed to be timeless. They are designed to be exactly in the moment. They are designed to catch the spirit of the time and to be used for that. And those are also important. We don't need only beautiful, timeless book typefaces. So let's please have more of this. More of what? I did something quite fun. I listed here, I don't know if you know typographica.org. If you don't, you should. The website publishes every year a selection of the best typefaces that were released with a presentation by a different designer on explaining why that typeface is relevant. And here are the little previews of all the typefaces from 2006 to 2018. And it's interesting to see which ones are 19th century revivals. And that is interesting because it's pretty spread out through the years, not much in the beginning. Then we have more around the 2010s, more or less, which is the only year that is not there, but around that time. And among those, this is to tell you also that 19th century is alive and kicking today. This is one pretty crazy project. This is not one family. This is a type foundry, where one type designer published in 2016 one typeface a week for 52 weeks, doing a revival of 19th century typefaces. You can find everything you want to know about it on, there's an article on typographica.org. But I love this because you can see all the typefaces that we have seen and even more. It's an exercise, but also some of them are very interesting because in the process of doing a revival, he made some choices to make them more interesting. Another project that I really love, it's showing how to take something from the past and make it more contemporary. This is History by Peter Bilak from Typotech, and it's a family of many different typefaces. Some of them are only serifs. Some of them are just swashes. Some of them are actual letter. And what is extremely interesting about this typeface is that you can overlay the different typefaces and create many different combinations, as you can see here. So gray is one typeface, and orange is another one. And this is a very smart idea of taking something from another century and make it relevant for today. How can we make decoration and shading and some crazy composition relevant for now today? This is a good example. Another favorite of mine that are typefaces with reversed contrast. So the typefaces that were born out of that style that you see there. And what is interesting here is that that is becoming popular this year, and very popular this year, and some instances in the past, but not that much. This is telling us two things. One is that many type designers thought there was a time to do that, and the other one is that graphic designers are more willing now to use crazy typefaces. So, and what is also interesting, if you look at this many typefaces, that the model is the same, more or less. Beatrice display is slightly different, but I'll talk about it later. But they are completely different. The model, the inspiration is the same, but the result, again, is different. Some are very decorative and soft. Some other are more geometric in a way. This is extreme, extreme contrast. Some others are working more on the texture. This is another favorite of mine. Beatrice display is doing something even further. If you look at the letters there, they are wrong. This shouldn't be this should be thick. That and it's wrong. Also, this is like the contrast is too high. But that's the point. That's done in a way that works. So at the moment, we are living in a very interesting time for type design, where limits are being pushed. And what I'm doing here today is trying to convince you that these typefaces are as good, as important as the regular timeless book typefaces or sans serif neo-grotesques that are also quite popular. Last, innovation is also not only related to letter shapes or contrast, but also how to approach the design of letters, how to design a family. And you can see, again, that there are some experimental typefaces, but what is happening is that that is becoming more and more common the more we get closer to today. And again, sorry, 2 slides. Some other examples here of what does it mean to do something decorative today. Some examples, like how can I draw letters with one continuous strokes without interrupting? That's an interesting concept. This that is called digestive, because it's French. It's completely crazy. Doesn't make any sense, but it's beautiful, it works, it's extremely popular. It will probably be too old in 5 years, in 10 years, who cares? Now we can use it and have fun with it. Other examples, if you don't know the work from the studio, Moore and McNeil in London, they are also pretty good in creating, they call themselves designers that draw letters, not type designers. But still, there's a very interesting experimentation also with programming, and the same is, with this typeface here that is actually an overlay of different typefaces inspired by wind. So again, let's experiment. That is not readable. Yes, so what? Readability is not always the goal. Sometimes you can make an effort and see something beautiful. Or one other thing that is interesting, and I'm nearly done, is how can I build a family? How can I connect different styles together so that they're not only connected by different weights or different widths? And one example here is Alda by Burton Hasebe, and the more it gets thicker, the more it gets rigid. It's a typeface inspired by different materials that have different qualities when you bend them. Another very interesting family is Fawn by Elise Savoy, and this is extremely crazy italic. That creates another very interesting texture. Of course, you would not set a book with that, probably not even a long paragraph, but it's beautiful. Buendia by Cesar Puertas, these are all families where they try to make different styles together that are not the usual criteria. So this is, in the end, it's Mineral. I've chosen some French typefaces because maybe those are the ones that you know less. But there's something very interesting going on in France with type design, and there are a lot of young French type designers that are doing very interesting work. And this is, again, pretty crazy. And in the way it gets bolder, so the contrast becomes extremely, extremely high, but the effect is quite nice. So in the end, this is an overview of the last 12 years. And I'm really happy to see that towards our time, we are getting more experimental, but not only that, I think experimentation has always been there. I think experimentation is becoming more mainstream, and graphic designers are more willing to use those typefaces, and so they become more popular. So the more is more sometimes, not only that less is more. So thank you for having listened to me, for your patience. Thank you for the Letterform Archive for hosting me for these many days, for my students during the workshop this weekend. It's been great fun, and I'm so thrilled that it's the first time that I'm speaking in a library, and this is fantastic. Thank you so much.
Hello, thank you so much. This is fantastic. I had a question, like in your career as an art director, did you have any constraints translating them into digital space? And then you had to like talk to different people to make them accept like this is exactly how you wanted to replicate them on websites or?
Let's say I have different hats. I am a researcher, I'm an educator, I'm also a designer. Sometimes I have a typeface that I really like, but I have to wait for the right project to use it. And some other times I have to work with typefaces that are given to me by brand guidelines or other things that I don't like or I don't think they're so well designed, because sometimes they chose some cheap typefaces, and there's a reason why typefaces are cheap, remember people. This is very important. So it depends. I mean, it's true for typefaces, it's true for many other aspects. When you are a designer, it's always a continued dialogue with the client, with the requirements. Sometimes there's a budget.
So your answer is subjective to every project.
What do you mean? Sorry?
It's subjective to every project.
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah.
Thanks.
Next.
That was a good question.
It seems like there's, well, I'm really interested in the tension between like advertising ephemerality, like essentially putting a bunch of people in the room to churn out product of varying quality. Mm-hmm. And I guess I'm wondering what you see when you compare, like sort of 19th century work and today's work. What's the value of essentially getting stuff out fast that is of dubious quality, but is ephemeral? Like it catches eyes and is kind of garbage, but works. It like serves the purpose, versus some small percentage of that like has lasting quality, and like is the value in the impact, the short-term impact, or is the value in the lasting quality of it? And is there any difference between what was happening in the 19th century and today?
It's a very good question. Thank you. No,
was there
really.
A question there?
I think first, when we look at something from the past, I think we have different eyes, and somehow that is more interesting. Even if you read, there are some magazines for printers from Italy at the end of the 19th century, and they hated those typefaces. They hated those typefaces because they could not print well, because they were too delicate, and because people that were typesetters did not know how to use them, and the quality was really low. So I think, to me, it's very interesting because now we say that we discuss everything on Twitter. They were discussing everything on magazines also 150 years ago. What I mean is not that everything has a quality per se. I think not all display typefaces are necessarily low quality. I think there are some display typefaces that are extremely smart and extremely well designed, and they are as good as some very good book or neo-grotesque typefaces. So the point, I'm probably more on the point of the, graphic designers / type designers. So I know I can distinguish a well-designed typefaces from a badly designed typefaces. So somehow those are not on my radar. I know how to separate that, which is also, it's not that easy, because also I think sometimes even a crappy typeface can look good in 5 letters in a big title. It's okay. If in that sense it works, why not? What I'm saying is that not everything has to be timeless. I'm not saying that everything has to be in the moment, but because generally in my education, those typefaces were considered not interesting, and the work done with those typefaces was considered not interesting. And I'm saying that there's an interest also in that. I'm not saying that those are the only interesting things, of course not. And there's also a lot of bad typography out there in many, also for things that are timeless. Well, or supposed to last 20 years, and there's something bad, and that stays there for 20 years. And yeah. I think, for instance, variable typefaces have not shown its best yet in terms of, I think from there something interesting can come out. I also see experimentation in many different areas. So how to create a family, what's a family, how to also creating with programming as well. There's, what I think is that is a time to do that graphic designers are more willing to go in that direction. But I don't know about specific trends that will come out, no.
If a typeface defines a certain time, like the 70s or something, doesn't that, in a sense, make it timeless? Because it defines that period for, in the history of typography books and whatnot?
Yeah, that's a good way to put it. When I say timeless, I refer to typefaces that can continue to be used without a specific decade in mind, or without a specific reference. In that sense, as a graphic designer, you can keep on using those without having a specific reference. Other typefaces that have a very definite connotation, they can still be used but have a specific connotation there. Some other, I'm thinking that Cooper Black is an amazing typeface that was pretty crazy at the time, and it's used for EasyJet branding. It's a brand that is using the typeface. It's interesting how that ended up being timeless, because probably it was not too extremely designed in the time where it was, or maybe, I don't know, there are sometimes I'm still amazed how Futura, Medium can still say something. I'm not a fan of Helvetica. I can say I've never used it in a project unless I was forced to by a client, but it has happened to me only once. And I think the reason why is because I was forced to use it at university, and I wanted to do something else. I don't know if I answered your question. I can keep on talking about type forever, so.
Thank you. So I wanted to get your thoughts on something that we're seeing here in the Silicon Valley, like where all product companies are turning their branding into a lowercase typeset neo-grotesque, like from Spotify to Airbnb, and likewise we're seeing fashion houses everywhere from Milan to Paris turning their logotypes to like all caps neo-grotesques. And just how does that make you feel as a designer and as a researcher? Because ultimately I'm thinking like, what will type design researchers look at like 20, 30, 100 years from now, where all the logos are probably looking the same?
And they will ask themselves, what got into them? Why? What was their problem? No, I think there's a, do you want your logo to be recognizable and legible at extremely small size in any situation? Then you cannot be too crazy. You can go crazy if you want to sacrifice legibility in some aspects. So in a way, there are many reasons why that is happening. One reason when a trend starts is that if you propose that design to another company, nobody will tell you that is wrong. They are doing that, so they must be right. So I can do that. Oh, 4 of them have done it, so I have to do it myself, because otherwise I will be the one that is left behind. So sometimes it's not, the trend is the reason. It's not, it's whatever the trend is. Myself, I think that it's a pity, because some of the redesigns were quite blunt. I mean, readability can be an issue, but I don't know, they look alike. I think it's a pity, because type design can say so much, but you need to risk a little bit more, and not everybody is willing to, I think.
All right.
You, right? Sure.
Hi. With, you know, right now there's kind of a typographic anarchy going on, whether it's like typography being stretched and treated and layered and, you know, anything goes pretty much. I guess my question to you is, I was taught that, you know, some things are sacred and you never stretch type, let's say, or you never do any kind of experimentation, you kind of leave it pure. Where in your mind does it become illustration versus typography, or is there like a fine line where that you draw? I'm just curious what you feel about today's typographic landscape.
How much time do you have? A few things, I'll try to be brief. One trend that is the undesigned, so that you choose, as a designer, you choose typefaces that are obscure, maybe a little quirky. You do a layout that has those little mistakes that you were taught were some things that you should not be doing. As an educator, I have an issue with that because you can be a very good type designer and graphic designer and decide to go for the ugly on purpose. And that's a legitimate, why not? If you are good at it, I think the thin line is it has to show that it's on purpose. If it looks like random, then maybe you've done it too much. I don't know, I'm thinking in architecture, Rem Koolhaas, there's this, in every building, there's some details that looks like it's unfinished. But you know that is on purpose. You know that they're not just, I don't know, forgot to paint a wall. And that I think is the thin line. So it has to be clear that the ugliness, the mistakes were done on purpose. If it's not clear, then it's just bad design. So it's very difficult to do mistakes on purpose and be good. That's even more difficult than being just a regular designer. I don't know if I answered you. Yeah.
Okay. Are you aware of any contemporary companies who have graphic designers that are using some of these typefaces?
These typefaces, like the ones that I showed, probably, yeah. I don't know, I cannot name some right now, but can someone from like, yeah. Yeah, yeah, that's a good question. Yes, some are. Dropbox chose an amazing typeface that's becoming popular, and that was a very bold choice to a newly released typeface, and it looks amazing. Okay. Not true. I mean, I moved to the US 2 months ago, so I don't know all the packagings and the brands yet, but.
What? Eats it? Oh, it's it.
Oh, okay, sorry. Okay.
Okay, one last question for Marta.
How many typefaces do you have in your library? How many typefaces do you have in your library?
The fact that I have friends that are type designers means that I get typefaces to try and use, and that is fun. But I don't use many. Sometimes there's a typeface that I really like, but I have to wait for the right projects. I have the typefaces that you've seen for that is a wood kit by Andre Job, and that was a present from him, for instance. The typeface on top is Monotype Grotesque. That is a favorite of mine that I kept using for many, many years. It's, you know, it depends. I had it like a few years that I used Fedra a lot. Then I couldn't see it anymore because I used it too much. So I thought, change typeface.